July 10, 1934, it's approaching 3 a.m. and the overlord of crime in Kansas City, Johnny Lazia, sits in the back seat of a sedan. Driving the car is his right-hand man Charles Carollo. Lazia's wife rides in the front passenger seat. Lazia serves at the pleasure of KC political boss Tom Pendergrast. Since he delivers the votes of the heavily populated Italian North Side to the Pendergrast Democratic machine, the police look the other way at his criminal enterprises, the bootlegging, gambling and whatnot. Lazia's influence also permeates through the police department. Lazia has it made. When it comes to crime, he has the town locked down. Nobody can operate without his say-so. He is well regarded by the Italian denizens of his bailiwick and considers himself the friend of everybody and believes that everyone is his friend as well. Once, when it was suggested that he wear a bulletproof vest, he responded, "Why should I wear a bulletproof vest? No one would shoot me." Lazia's road to ill-gotten riches began the previous century when everybody's friend was born in Brooklyn, New York on October 3, 1896 as Giovannino Lazio. At some point the family moved to Kansas City where their surname, Lazio, evolved into Lazia. His father Giuseppe, we are told, was a common laborer. Common labor was not in Johnny Lazia's future. He turned to crime. His first noted caper was stealing eggs at the age of 16. It didn't go well. He was shot while doing so and sent to a detention center from which he escaped. By his early 20s he was part of what was called the Black Mike Gang, named after the mob's patriarch J.J. Black Mike McGovern. Consisting of approximately 5 gunmen, the gang robbed taverns and gambling joints. By this time Lazia had also become an influential character in Kansas City's Fifth Ward politics, headed then by an Irishman named Mike Ross. Thanks to Lazia's work for Ross, he now had friends in high places looking out for him. This came in handy in 1916 when he and an accomplice were arrested on January 12 for robbing a saloon and its patrons. Somebody put up $5,000 so Lazia could be free until his trial scheduled for January 25. On January 22, police received a tip that Black Mike and other gang members were going to liberate Lazia from court at gunpoint. That day, Black Mike and Lazia were approached by cops and Black Mike opened fire on the officers while Lazia ran. Both men were captured. Lazia's robbery trial was put off until May. On February 29, Lazia was picked up for having a gun. He also took part in 2 burglaries in nearby Kansas City, Kansas on Sunday, April 16. He broke into a hardware store and stole some tools, which were used to crack a safe in another store. Though not found on the premises, he left a fingerprint in the hardware store which resulted in him being the first criminal in Kansas City, Kansas history to be captured using the new crime-fighting method. He was picked up on the 18th and quickly released after somebody posted a $500 bond. A few days later he was brought in to face the gun charge against him and was released on a $2,000 bond. When brought to trial, the gun in question had disappeared and it was determined that Lazia had been appointed a deputy marshal anyways. 1 charge down. The end of April found Lazia in a Kansas jail waiting for his trial for the hardware store and safe robberies. He was confident that he could beat the charge, claiming that he was out of the city at the time. "They have nothing on me," he said. "I can show just where I was." As for his fingerprints being used for evidence, he dismissed the new crime-solving method by flippantly exclaiming, "Fingerprints? Dime novel stuff." While he was waiting it out, Kansas City, Missouri authorities wanted to try him on the saloon robbery charge. Kansas handed him over to face the music. After a quick trial, Lazia was found guilty and sentenced to 15 years. After serving 2 weeks he was released on a $10,000 bond to await his appeal. Magically, the retrial kept getting put off. In the meantime, Lazia found religion. He attended a sermon by famed evangelist Billy Sunday and afterwards told anyone who listened that he was a new man. "I've quit the old life," he told reporters. "I've gone to work. I'm staying home nights. I've quit drinking and smoking. I'm a different man." He also went to his old haunts and cabarets to preach to his cronies. His mother believed that he had been transformed. The cops, not so much. One of the detectives who arrested him said, if he manages to get rid of that 15-year penitentiary sentence hanging over him, he'll be out as usual on the dark corners with a gun waiting for victims. More goodwill came Lazia's way on August 1st. There was an explosion in a general store that blew the married couple who owned it into the street. Lazia, who happened to be out doing some electioneering in a specially decorated car, pulled over to help. The woman was crying that her son was inside the burning building. Lazia ran in to look for him. He ran back out with scorched skin and hair. Getting fresh breaths, he ran back in to continue the search. He did this a few times, the crowd cheering him on each occasion. On one instance he thought that the kid might be upstairs. On his way up he found a woman and a child coming down the stairs and he helped them out before running back in and heading upstairs for a futile final search. After his last attempt, the appreciative crowd hoisted Lazia up on their shoulders and carried him back to his car. Turns out the boy was in the basement where he was found by the fire chief. The goodwill Lazia built over the second half of 1916 began to dissipate early the next year when, in the first week of 1917, a woman accused him and some of his friends of assaulting her in a car. The evening of February 23 found the young hoodlum being arrested for running a crap game. The following month, newspapers started asking why Lazia was still free when he should be in prison. Despite another arrest for a traffic violation, Lazia's political pals managed to keep him out of prison until he was finally sent away on December 10, 1917. Inside he was put to work as a bookkeeper in the commissary. Supposedly a much sought-after job, though it was reported that no strings had been pulled. Democratic political bosses, namely Tom Pendergast, went to work to get Lazia released. A mere 9 months into his 15-year sentence, the governor of Missouri went on vacation, leaving Lieutenant Governor Wallace Crossley as acting governor. Crossley had political aspirations, and to gain favor with the Democratic machine he pardoned Lazia. Not satisfied with the pardon, Lazia attempted to have the entire charge expunged from his record. He petitioned the prison board, along with his girlfriend Marie, who stated that she wanted to marry Lazia but her mother wouldn't support it if he was a criminal. Tom Pendergast also backed the move, but the prison board and governor didn't comply. Moving forward, in addition to whatever nefarious enterprises he was involved in, Lazia opened the Red Riding Hood Taxi Company in 1919. The 20s saw Lazia arrested a handful of times for running gambling houses. A raid on one of his gambling joints resulted in the death of an innocent man. In the first hours of January 9, 1924, police swooped into the cigar store that Lazia used as a front for his gambling room and general underworld hangout. Two of those inside were the Carollo brothers, Charles and Pete. Pete, who had a lengthy record, made a dash for it. An officer pursued him through the streets firing at him. One of the bullets ricocheted off the sidewalk and fatally struck a pedestrian in the head. Lazia enjoyed the protection of the Democratic machine and continued to cultivate the Italian vote on Kansas City's north side. His power grew to the point that he felt it was time to become the top dog. The main pal on the north side was still the Irishman Mike Ross, and when the elections of 1928 rolled around, Lazia made his move and usurped Ross in a non-violent coup to rule over the now mostly Italian district. Lazia was now the #1 man on the north side. Under Pendergast, Lazia became the underworld czar of Kansas City. He knew everything that was going on, and if anyone wanted to operate anything, they had to go through him. His inner circle consisted of his lieutenants Charles Carollo, Joe Lusco, Charles Gargata, Sam Scola and Gus Fassone. Lazia's position came with some headaches. There were also other criminal factions that tried Lazia's power. One such was a fellow Democratic leader named Casimir Welch, head of another political ward. On February 12, 1931, Jimmy Howard, a Welch man, was machine-gunned through the window of a taxicab office. Lazia's boys received the blame. Next came Jack Dalton, a former detective-turned-gangster who on the night of July 15, 1931, took numerous bullets to the back of his head while playing cards in his cottage. 1931 also saw Lazia being indicted as part of a large liquor ring when it was learned that a finance company that he was president of was funding vehicles that transported the contraband alcohol. In the end, his chief lieutenant, Charles Carollo, stepped up and accepted responsibility for it, paying $3,500 in fines. An embarrassing problem arose in July of 1931 when Southwest outlaw and bank robber Pretty Boy Floyd came to town. Floyd abided by the rules, paying for protection and not causing trouble. Lazia Lieutenant Joe Lusco used a flower shop as a front for his operations, and some rooms on the second floor were used as hideouts for outlaws in need. Floyd took one of these rooms. Another local hoodlum, John Lazia, was also there. On July 20, federal prohibition agents along with some local cops raided the establishment, not realizing two fugitives were hiding inside. Floyd managed to shoot his way out, killing one of the federal men and wounding others. Lazia wasn't so fortunate, losing a portion of his head to a shotgun blast. 1933 proved to be a tough year for Lazia. Like they did with other crime lords from other cities, the federal government put the Kansas City gang chief under the microscope and found that for the year 1929, he earned $82,000, approximately $1.5 million in 2025 dollars, and did not pay taxes. Little did Lazia know, but the seeds to his demise were planted that spring when St. Louis gangster Jack Griffin moved to town. He and an associate named Al O'Brien hooked up with local hoodlum Jimmy LaCapra, who was the brother-in-law of Lazia's Lieutenant Sam Scola. Hoping to profit from LaCapra's relationship with Scola, the men tried to muscle into some rackets, but Lazia wouldn't have it. He allowed them some privileges, but their ambitions were bigger than what Lazia would allow. That summer, Lazia and Kansas City in general received much unwanted national attention. It started on the evening of June 16 when the crime czar received a phone call. Pretty Boy Floyd just hit town with a sidekick, and they needed to hide out. Lazia set him up. A short time later, Lazia received a visit from another public enemy. Bank robber and killer, Vern Miller. Miller, who lived in Kansas City, was on friendly terms with Lazia. He played by the rules, he never broke the law in Kansas City and paid for his protection. The reason Miller visited Lazia was to let him know that a confederate of his, Frank Nash, had just been arrested in Hot Springs, Arkansas by the FBI and were at that moment traveling to Kansas City by train, where Nash would be transferred to a car and driven to Leavenworth Prison. Miller said that he intended to free his pal and was hoping that Lazia would lend him a couple of men. Lazia refused to have any of his boys get involved, but supposedly he told Miller that Floyd was in town. A meeting was held and Floyd agreed to help Miller. One thing Lazia did do for Miller, however, he made a call to the police department and was able to have the department's machine gun conveniently missing when the two detectives assigned to help with the Nash transfer showed up for work the next morning. They would now only have their sidearms. The plan was simple. When Nash appeared with the arresting party, Miller and Floyd would cover them with machine guns and free Nash. The following morning the train pulled into the Union Station. A few minutes later, out walked Nash, flanked by 4 FBI agents, an Oklahoma sheriff and the 2 Kansas City detectives. In the blink of an eye, Nash, the sheriff, the 2 Kansas City detectives and 1 FBI agent were dead in what has become known as the Kansas City Massacre. The wanton slaying of law officers did not reflect well on Kansas City, nor Johnny Lazia, who was supposed to oversee criminality and make sure things like this did not happen. Before things began to cool down from the massacre, Lazia received more unwanted attention. He and his gang wanted Ferris Anthon, a top bootlegger operating in rival Welch's territory, dead. To this end 4 of Lazia's men, Charles Gargata, Sam Scola, Gus Fassone and an unidentified hoodlum, set out to kill the man called the Al Capone of Kansas City. On August 12, 1933, the quartet sat in their Buick sedan near the Cavalier Hotel where Anthon lived and waited. A little after 1 a.m. Anthon parked in front of the building next door and the Buick pulled out. Driving the car was Scola with Fassone riding shotgun. In the rear was Gargata and the other gunman. The killer's sedan pulled up as Anthon was locking his car doors, and one of the men, most likely Gargata, sprung out and shot him 8 times. As the victim fell mortally wounded, Gargata jumped back into the sedan. Scola pulled away and made a quick left to make the getaway. Unfortunately for the killers, Driving directly at them was a car containing Kansas City Sheriff Tom Bash and Deputy Sheriff Lawrence Hodges. The officers were returning from a social engagement. Hearing the shots, Bash said, "Looks like we're running into something, keep your eyes open." A moment later the gangsters' car came careening around the corner. Both Scola and the deputy sheriff slammed on their brakes. Sheriff Bash and Hodges climbed from their car, Bash with a shotgun, Hodges a handgun. The gangsters opened fire on the lawmen. Flanking the car, Bash fired through the side window, killing both Scola and Fasson. Gargata and the other gunman leapt from the back seat. Hodges got into a running gunfight with the one gunman who managed to escape. Gargata fired a few rounds at Bash before surrendering. When questioned about the Anthon murder, Lazia assured the press that he didn't know anything about it. The cause of the slaying might have been alcohol, he told reporters. He didn't deny knowing the participants. Fasson must have been drunk. I can't explain his participation in such a thing any other way. He was always a jolly kid, a good kid. I am amazed to learn that he and Scola were in this. When asked if he was going to offer aid to Gargata, he answered, "No more than I would for any other Italian who gets into trouble." With Scola gone, his brother-in-law Jimmy LaCapra and Griffin, the ambitious big-shot wannabes, had even less pull with the underworld czar. Lazia let LaCapra know that, as the KC rackets went, LaCapra had gone as far as he was going to go. This did not sit well with LaCapra, Griffin and O'Brien, who bided their time. The year ends with Lazia having a falling out with his lieutenant Joe Lusco, who takes his gang and allies himself with the Welch faction. It took the feds nearly a year, but finally in early 1934 they got Lazia into a courtroom for his taxes. In the end, he was found guilty on 2 misdemeanors and sentenced to a year in prison. He immediately appealed the case, which kept him on the streets. His new trial was scheduled for October, but he wouldn't live to see it. Since their nemesis wasn't going to prison anytime soon, LaCapra and Griffin determined that if Lazia was put out of the way permanently, they might fare better in their pursuits. To this end, it is believed that Griffin may have imported a couple of torpedoes from his native St. Louis for the assist. On the evening of July 9, 1934, Lazia is out making the rounds. Driving the car is Charlie Carollo. Mrs. Lazia also sits up front. Her husband is in the rear. They don't realize that a car most likely driven by Jack Griffin and containing 2 killers has been following them. After making several stops throughout the evening, the trio head back to the Park Central Hotel where the Lazias live. Realizing that their quarry is heading home, Griffin speeds to the hotel, arriving a few minutes ahead of Lazia. He parks in the alley behind the hotel and stays at the wheel while his confederates, one toting a Thompson, the other a shotgun, run up and hide behind some hedges lining the hotel's driveway. Moments later, Carollo pulls up the drive and comes to a stop under the hotel's canopy. Exiting the back seat, Lazia goes to open the front passenger side door for his wife. Before he has a chance to open the door, the Tommy gun roars. 8 bullets slam into the ganglord's body and he falls to the ground. "I'm shot," he yells to Carollo, "Get Marie out of here, step on it, Charlie." Carollo doesn't have to be told twice. The gunmen hightail it back to their waiting sedan and Griffin speeds away while Lazia rides in agony calling for help. At the hospital there is little that can be done for him. He lingers through the morning, saying at one point, "Doc, what I can't understand is why anybody would do this to me. Why to me? To Johnny Lazia, who has been the friend of everybody. I don't understand." He dies early that afternoon. Police first pick up his former lieutenant Joe Lusco, but he is released. At his services, Lazia's sister implores his minions to get vengeance. It appears that Lazia's boys know who is behind their boss's murder. And they get to work doing just that. A few weeks later, on the evening of July 30th, Jack Griffin is entering his hotel when a man saunters up and fires 3 bullets into him. None are fatal and he is taken to the hospital. Kansas City crime historian Robert Unger tells us that as Griffin recuperates, a Kansas City cop, who does side work for the mob, shows up at the hospital with an order for the gunman's removal. Griffin is whisked away in an ambulance and never seen again. Later it's learned that the judge who had supposedly signed the order was on vacation and the signature had been forged. Griffin's and LeCapre's other pal, Al O'Brien, simply vanishes as well. Whether he fled on his own accord or was taken for a ride is unknown. LeCapre is the last man standing. For his own preservation, LeCapre flees to Argonia, Kansas to hide out with relatives, but he is found. On August 31st, while out driving with friends, a car speeds up and fires a shotgun at LeCapre. He drops to the floor slightly wounded. It takes a year, but they finally catch up with him in upstate New York. On August 19, 1935, he is taken for a ride. After putting a bullet in his brain, his killers pull over and drag his body into an apple orchard just off the highway. Johnny had been avenged. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and consider subscribing.